the topic of human trafficking, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about where I work, which is Covenant House. Many of you are probably familiar with it, but just in a quick nutshell, we serve homeless youth ages 16 to 20. You probably see our building right when you get out of the Lincoln Tunnel on 41st and 10th. We serve over 350 homeless young New Yorkers sleep up with us every night. And that's just, the fact that there are so many homeless young New Yorkers in our city. And even with that great number of 350, we're still turning people every day away every day. And that's going to connect to the human trafficking piece later. But the youth shelters in New York City are awful. And that's true with youth shelters across the country. We're part of an international federation. There's Covenant Houses in Latin America where they focus specifically on trafficked and sexually exploited girls. There are shelters in Canada, but primarily we're in the US. And we offer the basic wraparound comprehensive services, starting with the things that so many of us take for granted: food, shelter, laundry, a shower. But much more comprehensive than that: case management, substance abuse, healthcare, the legal department that I'm at. We have moms and babies in our programs, and our young people are with us for a variety of reasons. Over a third have signed themselves out of foster care. Many have had contact with the juvenile justice system. Some have been kicked out of their home for being gay. Some have been kicked out of their home for being pregnant. And others have families that are in shelter. So now, though, I want to get into a little bit of the main topic of today, because I know we only have 8 minutes. I'm going to try to talk fast. I was asked to give a little bit of a brief background on just what is human trafficking. That's probably, start with the legal definition, which is slightly a little boring, but I think it's important to set the stage to just make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm just for 1 second going to read. Under federal law, sex trafficking is when a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained the age of 18. Labor trafficking is very similar. It's also induced work that's induced by force, fraud, or coercion. But in plain English, what does that mean? That means commercial sex, which is trading sex for something of value, right? It could be stripping, it could be prostitution, but against a person's will, through force, fraud, or coercion. And under federal law, you can't consent until the age of 18. So that means any person under the age of 18 who is engaging in prostitution is a victim of human trafficking. Okay, so let me be clear about that. There is no such thing as a child prostitute, right? There is only children who are being sexually exploited. And if you're over 18 and you decide, usually out of sheer desperation, you have no other option and no other choice, that you're going to willingly engage in commercial sex, but you have an abusive pimp, and at one moment that pimp says, you don't want to do it, you don't feel like doing it that day, and that pimp threatens to beat you up, you are now a victim of human trafficking. If someone is forcing you to do this at any time, you are a victim of human trafficking. So that hopefully will correct some myths. There's no need for travel from abroad. That happens. People from other countries are forced to secure. That is trafficking. That's not required. It's not like you see on TV. I myself am a little bit of insomniac, so I watch way too much of those silly crime shows at 3 o'clock in the morning on USA when I can't sleep. They all cover human trafficking, and it all looks the same, right? Someone locked in a cage, in a crate. That can happen, and that is human trafficking, but that's not really what I see in my office. What I see in my office are people who are emotionally bonded to their pimps and traffickers. Cages are not necessary, right? Pimps use the least degree of force that they can, so I think that's really important. So I think I'm just going to try to speed it up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about a study that I did when I first got to Covenant House. I've been at Covenant House for 4 years. And when I got there, they asked me to develop best practices in programming for trafficking. And the first thing I wanted to do was look at the data. I knew that pimps prey on homeless youth, but I had no idea how many. And when I looked at the data, we didn't have any, right? We had about 3 young people a year that we had identified as a survivor of human trafficking. I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't because we were doing anything wrong, but it's because young people don't show up at our doorstep saying, help me, I've been trafficked, right? They say, I'm hungry, I want bed, I want food. And you can't ask someone, have you been trafficked, right? They're gonna look at you like you're nuts. So we brought in Fordham University to help us validate a tool to identify the trafficked youth within our midst. And we did a study. We spoke to about 200 of our young people, just a random sample, and found that close to 25% had either fit the federal definition of trafficking or didn't quite fit the definition because they were over the age of 18, but felt so desperate that they felt like they had no choice but to trade sex for something of value. And I believe those numbers are low. That's what you could get someone to admit on a first interview. So that's a lot. 25%, we see about 2,000 young people a year. And when I spoke to the young people and asked them what could have prevented this, the answers were pretty simple and consistent. A person who cared. If someone had asked some questions in my life, if a foster care caseworker had asked, where was I getting all these dollar bills from? Like just one person in my life who cared. A place to stay. Earlier I said that the youth shelters are full. The pimps know that, right? So what happens is when someone doesn't have a place to stay, grandma kicks them out of the house, they sign themselves out from foster care, they go to a youth shelter and it's full, there will be a pimp who says, where are you gonna go? Why don't you go with me? And then the last thing was job training and education. If a young person doesn't have skills and education to allow them to get a real job, who's gonna hire them? The strip club. The strip club doesn't care that they don't have an address because they're homeless. Doesn't care they don't have an education. Kind of likes those things. And then we saw a lot of cases where the stripping led to a client pulling a gun on a young person and led to trafficking. Okay, yeah. So that leads to my calls to action. And really it's just one big one, which is there's a lot of discussion these days on human trafficking, which is really important because it was ignored for so long. But I personally believe you can't discuss trafficking in a vacuum. It's about a broken, pimps don't go after everybody. They go after those most vulnerable. They go after youth in foster care. They go after homeless youth. So I truly believe that if you want to be on the front grounds of fighting human trafficking, be a mentor for an at-risk youth, right? Do not have to go to India. You do not have to go abroad. Be a mentor for an at-risk youth or be a foster parent. To me, any foster parent is like the #1 person who is fighting human trafficking. Because when you go back to prevention, that's what our young people said, a place to stay and someone who cared.